Welcome to the program. I'm Okpeyemi Owosheni. We start off with business news. Nigeria's external reserves witnessed a net increase of over $260 million within a single week, signaling a modest improvement in the country's foreign account. Latest data from the Central Bank of Nigeria revealed that the increase began on May 9th, when reserves stood at $38.12 billion. The figure had risen to $38.21 billion by May 12th. It continued again, reaching $38.30 billion on May 14th and $38.33 billion on May 15th, before closing the week at $38.38 billion on May 16, 2025. Now, the rebound follows a challenging period caused by pressure from external debt repayment, falling oil production, and volatile forex demand. And the federal and Lagos state government have called for investment in production of local goods as well as consumption of made in Nigeria products to boost small and medium enterprises in the country. Speaking at the 16th meeting of the National Council on Industry, Trade and Investment, organized by the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, the Lagos State Commissioner for Commerce, Cooperatives, Trade and Investment highlights the urgent need to diversify the country's economy from over-reliance on oil. GB360's Victoria Akonde completes this next report.
Recent global shifts in energy policies, coupled with declining oil demand and volatile crude prices, have underscored the urgent need for Nigeria to reduce its reliance on oil revenues. At the state level, the Lagos state government says it is already making efforts at creating an enabling environment that will attract investment, support industrial growth, and empower businesses to thrive. While advocating more investment in producing local goods and consuming them rather than relying on importation of foreign goods, the Lagos State Commissioner for Commerce, Cooperatives, Trade and Investment, Folashade Ambrose, urges both federal and state governments to explore new markets, unlock the potential of the country's youthful population, and embrace the digital economy as a catalyst for industrial and trade expansion.
Our strategy is rooted in two far-reaching frameworks. One, the proposed Lagos State Industrial Policy, LSIP, 2025 to 2030, which redefines industrialization as a deliberate, inclusive, and technological-driven enterprise focused on local value addition, manufacturing excellence, and green industrial growth.
In his address, the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, says Nigeria must swiftly implement necessary measures to diversify its economy.
Build up labor-intensive sectors, all right? And of course, produce locally for domestic consumer market. I made a reference earlier on that economic activities are in three planks: production, consumption, then exchange or trade in between. Now, my recommendation with respect to production is that we should look at what India did. India began to promote a concept. They called it Make in India. Not made, Make in India. Which speaks to the fact that we make our geography conducive to manufacturers to produce within India. Now, the same thing can be done by every subnational.
Other speakers urged the governments to adopt policies that will make Nigeria's manufacturing sector conducive for both local and international manufacturers.
Studies have indicated that flexible work-hour arrangements within the clusters, and that's what our study shows, have led to improved employee performance and retention, highlighting the importance of adaptive human resource practices in manufacturing setting. However, like I said, challenges such as infrastructure deficit and overregulation by government agencies, 3 tiers of government agencies, persistently result in suboptimal performance. I move to another part of the country, Aba manufacturing cluster. The Aba policy measures and reducing bureaucratic hurdles are essential to create a more attractive environment for businesses within these clusters. Provision of tax incentives can encourage investments and growth, simplifying trade procedures and reducing import duties on raw materials will lower production costs and improve competitiveness.
All the speakers say Nigeria has the potential to become number one in Africa in the industrial sector. They also call on the government at all levels to aggressively explore the non-oil sector, which they argue holds strong potential for revenue generation, job creation and economic transformation. Victoria Akonde, TV360 News, Lagos.
We'll go on a break now and be back with company news. Welcome back. The Chartered Institute of Bankers of Nigeria, CBN, has reassured the public of the stability and safety of the country's banking sector, describing recent media reports questioning the financial health of a Nigerian bank as misleading and unfounded. In a statement issued by its president and chairman of the council, Pius Olanrewaju, the institute emphasized that such publications are intended to disrupt ongoing reforms and undermine the steady progress made in strengthening the financial system. Now, aligning with the Central Bank of Nigeria, the CBN urged the public to disregard false narratives and rely solely on information from verified sources. Now, there's more ahead when Money Matters return. We'll break down why the Central Bank of Nigeria is holding interest rates steady again. Stay with us for more details. Now, for the second consecutive time in 2025, the Central Bank of Nigeria has retained the monetary policy rate, which benchmarks interest rate in the country at 27.50%. Now, this decision is part of the outcomes of the Apex Bank 300 Monetary Policy Committee meeting. The CBN Governor, Olayemi Cardoso, reviewed that the committee retained the cash reserve ratio at 50% and liquidity ratio at 30%. TV360's correspondent, Tamilore Akinkolie, has more details on the outcome of the CBN's MPC briefing in this next report.
The CBN governor says the decision to maintain MPR at 27.50% was unanimous and reflects a conservative policy stance aimed at consolidating the effects of earlier tightening measures. He also said the committee noted the relative improvements in some key macroeconomic indicators, which are expected to support the overall moderation in prices in the near to medium term, such as the narrowing gap between Nigeria's forex market and BDC windows, as well as easing price of PMS.
Retain the MPR at 27.50%. 2. Retain the asymmetric corridor around the MPR at plus 500 to minus 100 basis points. 3. Retain the cash reserve ratio of deposit money banks at 50% and merchant banks at 16%.
Referencing the latest inflation figures released by the National Bureau of Statistics (NBS), which is to 23.71% in April 2025, down from 24.23% recorded in March, Cardoso commended the federal government's efforts in boosting food supply and addressing insecurity in farming communities, noting that these steps contributed to moderation in food inflation. However, the committee also acknowledged ongoing inflationary pressures, including high electricity tariffs, persistent foreign exchange demand, and lingering structural issues in the economy.
This improvement was driven by both the oil and non-oil sectors, with the services sector being the major contributor. Gross external reserves increased by 2.85% to $38.90 billion as at 16th of May 2025 from $37.82 billion at end of March 2025.
On the broader economic outlook, the CBN governor said the naira has become more competitive, attracting increased interest from foreign investors and boosting confidence in the economy. While acknowledging the challenges faced by the current leadership over the past 18 months, Cardoso assured Nigerians that ongoing reforms are geared towards correcting past policy missteps and restoring public trust in the central bank.
There are a lot of areas that we literally need to reset completely and start all over again. And we're doing so. But those things do take time. They do take time. But what I want to assure you is that we will be consistent as we have been over the past 18 months. And we believe that once we continue in that direction, we will be successful in building back the trust that has been so badly eroded over a period of time.
With the Monetary Policy Committee opting for stability over change, all eyes will now be on how inflation and currency markets respond in the coming months. Tamilore Akinkwole, TV360, Lagos.
Now, to unpack this decision and its wider impact, I'm now joined by financial analyst Femi Oladele. Thank you for joining me on the program, Mr. Oladele. Now, why do you think the CBN has chosen to hold the interest rate steady for a second consecutive time, despite moderating inflation? And also, what will you say are the underlying risks it is prioritizing?
Thank you so much, and good morning once again. So I would say that all of the reasons as adduced by the CBN governor are clearly stated and highlighted, but I would say personally that one of the significant reasons would be that it's a learning phase for the CBN, really. Many things are going on in the monetary space, including the fiscal space, and it looks like knowledge is a bit out of touch and we want to learn what is happening. So I believe that significantly, while they might say, oh, inflation figures are going well, FX demands, and there's a bit of stability in FX and all of that, I believe more significantly is the fact that it's a learning phase and you want stability when you are learning. And so that's, in my opinion, what the CBN is doing at this time. They want to understand the effect of all of those policies and see how they impact the economy before they now shake the tables. That's what's, in my opinion, is the reason for the retention at this time.
All right, speaking of learning phase, after 6 rate hikes that we saw in 2024, now what does this double oath suggest about the CBN's monetary policy outlook? Would you also call it a learning phase, and also about its confidence in current inflation trends that we've seen so far this year?
So generally, 2024, I would say, is a roller coaster for Nigeria. Generally, we saw unprecedented figures and it was out of touch. Many people, many analysts were shocked by the results that we saw last year, but this year has been quite stable. And I would say generally that it shows that the CBN is also learning quickly. So I wouldn't call it in this sense right now a learning phase anymore, but I would believe that they are learning quickly and understanding how things work generally in Nigeria, especially when we have just recently rocked the boat. Because at that time, many things were happening. There was heightened political tension. Security was a big deal, especially in the food producing areas, Benue and Plateau. There was also the issue with people having not come out of the shock of the elections. And so many things were happening at the same time. And then we now brought in the monetary policy reforms, which didn't sit well. And that's why I believe we had those significant distortions or instability in those figures. But right now, I would say that they have learned significantly and they are understanding the terrain very much and handling it well. I would highlight two things that I see, especially with respect to what is happening now. We see significantly in the fiscal space that a lot of activities and policies, including programs, are going on, helping to stabilize the economy, although they are not achieving the expected results. Expected, I mean, now from the masses. We want inflation to go to single digits, if you ask me. We also want FX to go to maybe $1 to, let's say, 500 naira, but that's not. So that's the expectation bits that I'm talking about. But we also understand that things are generally improving. Generally, I say generally carefully because there are still things that are quite, and the CBN governor also noted it. You recall that he mentioned about electricity. It's a significant issue. Even internet access and so many other things, health services and all of that. Although we understand that there is a growth trajectory for the pharmaceutical industry in Nigeria based on research. But looking at it generally, we have seen improvements and a bit of stability. And I think that that's a very good one for the economy at this time.
Right, so let's now speak about the organized private sector. They've raised concerns about retaining the MPR consecutively. Now, what would you say are the likely effects of sustained high interest rate on credit access now for businesses, especially SMEs and manufacturers?
Thank you. So many times retaining the MPR does not necessarily mean that the finance cost will be retained. It does not mean that like to be retained at all. So now we have 27.5%. It does not mean that when you go to the bank, if you had a previous loan of 33%, it doesn't mean that it's going to be stable at 33%. It's even likely to increase because the retention does not mean that things are slowing down. If it was a reduction, then we could say, oh, the rates would be retained. But now that we have a retention, I fear that some facilities would even receive increased rates, and that's not too good for businesses. So while it looks like retention on face value, for businesses, it actually means a bit of uncertainty or risk. And I fear that some facility holders would begin to reach out to their debtors to say, see, we are increasing this rate a bit. They won't increase so much. So I don't expect a significant increase in rates. They're looking at maybe between 1 to 2% just to ensure that there is a bit of stability also for them. But it increases finance costs, in my opinion. I am expecting that there will be a little bit of increase, and that also affects productivity, that affects access. That if you want to take a new loan, you wouldn't be taking it at the rate you took the last one. So I believe that it impacts especially small businesses. And when you now combine it with the fact that we live in a collateralized economy where your cash flows don't necessarily matter in getting access to significant finance. So I fear that it's going to slow down borrowings.
All right, now, speaking about effectiveness and retention, do you think the current MPR of 27.50% is still effective in curbing inflation, or is it now doing more harm than good to real sector productivity, I meant to say, bearing in mind that the main reason why they kept on increasing MPR last year was because inflation was over 30%. So now that it has reduced, do you think it's still very effective in curbing inflation?
So I have significant reservations with the inflation figures. You know, I earlier mentioned one time that I don't know the methodology, I mean the intricacies of the methodology used to just change those figures from the previous methodology. But I have reservations, even with respect to the inflation figures that were recently released. But let's leave my reservations. But the truth now is that if you consider that the reason why we're pegging the MPR to inflation figures and other economic indices is to see how to manage inflation. I don't think that MPR alone is enough to manage inflation. I had mentioned it many times that for public policy, you cannot use just one metric or one system to change the entire thing. It needs so many things. There will be political uh, factors, there will be economic factors, there will be social factors. And I had mentioned also that Nigerians are perceptive. So just hearing about it alone can change things, swing either ways. And so I wouldn't say that retaining it at 27.5% does any significant difference to the inflation figures if we don't address those other factors that are significant in managing inflation. I've mentioned them: infrastructure, energy, security. If those things are not dealt with significantly, there is no magic that the MPR would do to that.
Right now, let's speak about the high cash reserve ratio of 50% on commercial banks and overall liquidity in the economy. What will you say are the short and medium term implications of maintaining such a high cash reserve ratio? It's like about 50%. Do you think it's a good one?
So I don't think it's not good. The reason why, because it's also moderated. If you retain that at 50% and for merchant banks at 16%, there's also a moderation. So having that, I don't think it's a high figure really, because if commercial banks want to access more than that, they know how to do that. And so that figure is actually, in my opinion, it's more theoretical than practical. In the practical sense, if there is a need to reduce that figure, even the bankers committee know what to do, and so that won't be a problem at all. In my opinion, I think it's more theoretical than practical. I mean, the figure.
Now, how effective do you think the monetary policy alone is in addressing Nigeria's inflation? I know you already mentioned that it is not very effective. Now, let's look at structural issues like electricity pricing and food supply constraints, and most importantly, insecurity. What other things do you think the government needs to do to put a balance between the MPR and other things to maintain inflation, basically?
Okay, so aside the real sector that I've mentioned, enhancing, improving infrastructure, improving energy, but when we talk about improving energy, we also have the responsibility of higher costs. And higher cost translates to higher rates for consumers as well. And then we look at other areas that we are currently having difficulty: data cost, very, very, we know what is happening in that area at this time. And so when you look at all of them together with the MPR, then a difference can be made. And that's why I said that we shouldn't look at the MPR in isolation, because in isolation, it can do little. If we run, imagine we are doing it theoretically and we run a regression analysis, the percentage control that MPR has over inflation will be very, very insignificant if we exclude all of those other factors. And so I don't think we should focus on isolating the MPR. Yes, that's the issue for discussion in this interview, and I understand that it's important that we discuss its impact. But more significantly, I think we should take it as a whole and not just the MPR alone. The MPR can do significantly if other assumptions are met. Right now, where we are in Nigeria at this time, we haven't met those thresholds for the MPR to begin to pull numbers that would ensure that the inflation rate goes down significantly. And so if you ask me what else can the government do, I would say that aside the real sector, aside, if you look at what rent is doing at this time, you would understand. And many states are beginning to raise concerns that landlords are increasing rates, and the landlords' argument are that the economy is also difficult. That so go and talk to the government. And so, if we don't address structural issues, there is nothing the NPR can do. Even if we choose to reduce the NPR to 20%, which I know that won't happen. If we choose to reduce it to 20%, it won't automatically have the inflation figures. So, in isolation, it can do just little, in my opinion.
All right, so now one of the things the CBN governor mentioned during the MPC meeting was the fact that the naira has become competitive against the United States dollars. Now, to what extent would you say the CBN's current policy stance has contributed to exchange rate stability and also foreign investors' confidence? Because according to him, many investors have been coming into the country.
Yes, so but my question would be as what? As FPI or as FDI? Because we need to make those distinctions. Yes, I understand that investors have been coming, but how have they been coming? Because we cannot rely on FPIs alone. We need FDI. It takes time. And I've mentioned this, and I'm an advocate for patient capital in Nigeria. If we don't have patient capital, it will be very difficult for us to develop. You can't develop and maybe like you can't develop the real sector with short-term investments. We need investment into the long term. And I give an example of mortgage. You see mortgages in other clients for 25 years. But in Nigeria, when you talk about access to finance, you're looking at 12 months, 1 year, 2 years. That cannot give us the kind of spin-off that we need. And so we have to look at that in that area. And so if I would profile a solution, I would say that we need enough significantly sufficient patient capital where people can now build. Yes, investors are coming in, but are they patient enough to ensure that we build an ecosystem that can sustain itself, or they're just going to come in and pull out after a few months or maybe 1 to 2 years? That's not good for our economy. And I hope that the CBN is doing its best to monitor the inflows and not just have those inflows come in and go out at will. I'm really hoping that we get FDIs to develop our real sectors.
All right, so briefly, just before I let you go, do you think there are any risk of over-tightening the economy, especially with such elevated interest rates and restricted liquidity?
No, I don't think so. But in the next MPC meeting, I'm hoping that rates will be reduced. This is my own hope that the rates will be reduced so that it gives a bit of, because we are looking at a 2025 where we make more impact, especially in the MSME sector. And if that is to be done, then we need more access to finance. And if we need access to finance, we need them to be affordable also, so that you can ensure that we can produce well and also contribute significantly to the economy. So I don't think we should be looking at tightening anymore, and so we should be looking at reducing the rates in the coming days.
Well, we'll keep monitoring what the CBN will do ahead of the next MPC meeting. Financial analyst Femi Oladele, many thanks for lending your thoughts on the program.
It's a pleasure to be here again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, that's it on this episode of the program. Many thanks for joining us. I'm Okpeyemi Obosheni. See you next time.